I'll raise your children and you'll give me more. That's what the mountain man told the pregnant widow, standing in the rain with nothing but 2 crying little ones. Folks thought he was heartless. But out here, a roof costs more than gold. It costs trust. It costs promises. And sometimes it costs a family you ain't ready for. But this wasn't just a bargain for shelter. Under his boots ran the only spring left untouched by the mining company's greed. And the men coming for it didn't care if a woman gave birth on their doorstep. They had forged papers, hired guns, and no shame. But the widow had something they didn't: an oath, an old debt, and the courage to claim a family from the ashes. When the fire comes and the land turns to dust, will the man who's lost everything find the strength to keep what matters most? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The cold spring rain pelted against the lined shack's worn timber walls as Clara Evans huddled closer to the crackling hearth. Her soaked skirts clung to her legs, and she could feel her unborn child stirring restlessly within her. The warmth of the fire slowly seeped into her tired bones, but her mind wouldn't rest, replaying the strange bargain she'd just struck with the mountain man who owned this shelter. Elias' heart moved like a shadow through the dim cabin, his heavy boots surprisingly quiet on the rough wooden floor. He was a giant of a man, his wild beard and weather-worn face making him look more bare than human in the flickering firelight. But there was something in the careful way he laid out the blankets, something gentle in how he'd stacked extra wood near the hearth, that gave Clara hope she hadn't made a terrible mistake. Little Ellie's breath came in soft puffs against Clara's neck as she rocked her youngest in the creaking chair Elias had pulled close to the fire. The child's golden curls were finally starting to dry, though her cheeks were still flushed from their long journey through the rain. Tommy sat cross-legged on one of the blankets, his keen eyes following Elias's every move. "That's a mighty fine knife, mister," he said, pointing to the hunting blade at Elias's hip. "Tommy," Clara warned softly, but Elias paused in his work. "Reckon it is," he replied, his voice rough like gravel. "Been with me 15 years. "Could you teach me to use one?" Tommy asked, straightening his thin shoulders. Clara opened her mouth to object, but Elias spoke first. "A boy ought to know how to handle a blade proper." His eyes met Clara's. "With his ma's permission, of course." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. This was the future they'd agreed to, not just shelter for the night, but a life together. Clara's throat tightened as she remembered his blunt proposal. "I'll raise your children, and you'll give me more." The words had shocked her, but there'd been no malice in them, only a stark practicality that matched the harsh mountain landscape. "We'll see," Clara said carefully, adjusting Ellie's sleeping form in her arms. "First, we need to get through this night." Elias nodded, returning to his task of organizing the cabin's sparse supplies. Clara watched as he pulled out a tin of coffee and a few strips of dried meat. Her stomach growled at the sight, reminding her they hadn't eaten since morning. "Ain't much," he said, setting the food on the rough-hewn table. "But it'll keep you till morning." "I'm much obliged," Clara replied, her voice firm. "But remember our agreement. I'll earn my keep. Tomorrow I'll start with a proper cleaning of this place." She glanced around the cabin, noting the dust in the corners and the dishes piled in the dry sink. A ghost of a smile flickered beneath Elias's beard. "Reckon you will at that?" Tommy's eyes were growing heavy, though he fought to keep them open. Clara could see the exhaustion of their 2-day trek finally catching up with him. "Time for sleep, young man," she said softly. "But Ma—" Tommy started to protest. "Your ma's right," Elias rumbled, surprising them both. "Dawn comes early in these mountains." Something in his tone made Tommy nod solemnly. The boy crawled under the blankets, and Clara carefully laid Ellie next to him. Her back ached as she straightened, her swollen belly making every movement a challenge. Elias watched her with those guarded eyes of his. "There's a bed through that door," he said, gesturing to the cabin's only other room. "It ain't much, but it's yours now." "No," Clara said firmly. "I'll sleep here with my children. We'll sort out proper arrangements tomorrow." He studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Suit yourself." He moved toward the door, shrugging on his oilskin coat. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, trying to keep the alarm from her voice. "Got a lean-to out back? I'll sleep there tonight." He paused at the door, his massive frame filling it completely. "Ain't proper otherwise." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, leaving only the sound of rain and the pop of burning wood. She sank down onto the blankets beside her children, one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her uncertainty. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls as Clara tried to make sense of how much her world had changed in a single day. From the mining camp's muddy streets to this mountain shelter, from widow to promised wife, though that word hadn't been spoken aloud by either of them. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of wood smoke and pine. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, her children were warm and dry, and that would have to be enough. Dawn broke over the mountain with a pale golden light. Clara woke to the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. Her back ached something fierce as she eased herself up from the blankets, careful not to wake Tommy and Ellie, who still slept soundly beside her. Through the cabin's grimy window, she could see Elias's broad form, his powerful strokes making quick work of a fallen pine. The morning air was crisp when she opened the door, carrying the tin coffee pot to the pump. The handle creaked in protest, proof of long disuse. "Needs grease," Elias called out, pausing in his work. Sweat already darkened his shirt despite the cool morning. "This whole place needs more than grease," Clara replied, surveying the cabin's interior in the morning light. Dust lay thick on every surface, dishes were piled haphazardly, and cobwebs decorated the corners like tattered lace. The disorder made her fingers itch. She got the fire going and set water to boil, then tied her apron tight above her swollen belly. There was work to be done, and Clara Evans had never been one to waste daylight. She attacked the dust first, using an old rag she'd found in a drawer. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, pushing away thoughts of yesterday's strange bargain. The children stirred as the morning wore on. Tommy's eyes went wide at the sight of Elias returning with a freshly killed rabbit. "Can I watch?" he asked, scrambling to his feet. Elias glanced at Clara, seeking permission. She nodded, though her stomach turned at the thought of the bloody work. "Mind what Mr. Hart tells you," she called after Tommy as he scampered out. Little Ellie followed more slowly, thumb in her mouth. Through the open door, Clara could hear Elias's low rumble as he explained each step of skinning the rabbit. Tommy peppered him with questions, his initial shyness forgotten in the face of such fascinating work. Even Ellie stood close, though she hid behind her brother when Elias looked her way. Clara had just finished scouring the dry sink when she saw Elias bend to drink directly from the spring. "Mr. Hart," she called sharply, "there are cups in this cabin for a reason." He straightened, water dripping from his beard. "Been doing it this way 15 years. "Well, you've been doing it wrong for 15 years, then." Clara held out a freshly washed tin cup. "We'll all drink from the same spring. I won't have my children picking up bad habits." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or remembrance. He took the cup without argument. The day passed in a blur of cleaning and organizing. By supper time, the cabin had begun to look like a proper home. The rabbit stew simmered in a newly scrubbed pot, filling the air with savory steam. Clara had even found an old checkered tablecloth in a trunk, shaking out the dust and spreading it over the rough table. "Smells good," Elias said gruffly as they sat down to eat. The children had already warmed to him, especially Tommy, who insisted on sitting beside the mountain man. After the bowls were cleared, Elias pulled out his knife and a piece of soft pine. "Time you learned something useful," he told Tommy, showing him how to hold the blade safely. Start with something simple, like a stick man. Tommy's face scrunched in concentration as he worked the wood with clumsy strokes. Clara watched them while she darned a sock, her heart catching at the gentle way Elias guided the boy's hands. A sudden flutter low in her belly made her pause. Another followed, stronger this time. Clara recognized the warning signs. The baby was coming, though not immediately. She kept her face calm, unwilling to show weakness. These weren't her first labor pains, and she reckoned she had hours yet before things turned serious. But Elias was more observant than she'd credited. His eyes tracked her movements as she shifted in her chair, noting how she pressed one hand against her lower back. He said nothing, but she caught him watching her with a mixture of worry and uncertainty, as if facing a situation his mountain skills hadn't prepared him for. "Time for bed," Clara announced when Ellie began nodding off at the table. "Tommy, put away your whittling. You can work on it tomorrow." "But Ma," Tommy started to protest. "Mind your mother," Elias said quietly. Tommy ducked his head and obeyed, carefully wrapping his half-carved stick in a piece of cloth. As Clara settled the children into their blankets, another contraction rippled through her. She breathed through it silently, already planning what needed to be done. She had supplies in her bundle: clean rags, a sharp knife, string. She would need hot water soon, but not yet. First, she would make sure her children were sleeping soundly. Elias stood by the door, his massive frame blocking the starlight. "You need anything?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "Not yet," Clara answered steadily, meeting his gaze. "But I reckon I will before morning." The mountain air carried a hint of summer as 2 days passed in an uneasy rhythm. Clara's false labor pains came and went like distant thunder, keeping her close to the cabin while she put her skilled hands to work. The wooden shutters had hung crooked for too long, and she found satisfaction in setting them right, driving nails with precise strikes despite her unwieldy belly. Inside, neat piles of mending grew smaller as she worked through the children's threadbare clothes. Her needle flashed in the sunlight streaming through the newly cleaned windows, patches appearing like magic under her careful stitches. The cabin was slowly transforming, becoming more home than shelter. That morning, Elias had taken Tommy out hunting, the boy perched proudly on their ancient mule. "Mind the rabbit snares," Clara had called after them, fighting a smile at Tommy's obvious excitement. Even Elias seemed lighter, his usual scowl softened by the boy's chatter. Clara paused in her mending as hoofbeats approached the cabin. 2 riders appeared around the bend, their clothes too fine for simple travelers. Her heart sank as she recognized the mining company's emblem on their saddlebags. "Ellie, go inside now," Clara said quietly, setting aside her sewing. The little girl scurried through the door without argument, sensing her mother's tension. The first rider, a well-dressed man with cold eyes, dismounted with practiced ease. "Mrs. Hart, I presume?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Lester Cray, foreman for the Western Mining Corporation. This here's Mr. Peters, our land agent." Clara stood carefully, one hand on her lower back. "Mrs. Evans," she corrected firmly. "Mr. Hart should return shortly." As if summoned, Elias and Tommy appeared on the trail, the mule laden with their morning's catch. Elias's face darkened at the sight of their visitors. "Hart?" Cray called out, his friendly tone at odds with his sharp gaze. "Got some business to discuss?" Tommy slid from the mule, clutching their string of rabbits. "Inside, son," Clara murmured, and he went without protest, understanding grown-up trouble when he saw it. Cray pulled a document from his coat with flourish. "Company's acquired deed to this parcel, including the spring, got it all official-like from the territory office." He handed the paper to Elias, who took it with dirt-stained hands. "This is my land," Elias growled. "Been working it 15 years. "Funny thing about that," Cray said, not sounding amused at all. "Checked the records myself. Never found your homestead application. Lands unclaimed, far as the territory's concerned. Clara watched Elias's face go pale beneath his beard. His massive hands trembled slightly as they held the deed. "May I?" Clara asked, holding out her hand. Elias passed her the document wordlessly. She studied it carefully, years of handling mining camp paperwork serving her well. The territorial seal looked right at first glance, but the impression was too shallow. The judge's signature slanted wrong, and the date? "This deed's dated last winter," she said slowly. "Curious, since Judge Matthews passed away last fall." Cray's smile tightened. "Clerical error, I'm sure. Doesn't change the facts. Company needs this spring for our ore washing operations upstream." He mounted his horse with deliberate movements. "You've got a week to clear out. Company's being generous given the circumstances." His eyes flicked to Clara's condition. They watched the riders disappear down the trail. Clara's labor pains chose that moment to ripple through her belly, stronger than before. "Inside," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to talk." Elias slumped into a chair, looking defeated. "Should have told you straight off. Started the paperwork years back, when my Sarah was alive. We were going to make this place official, proper-like." His voice roughened. "After the fever took her and the babies, I couldn't face town. Left it unfinished." Clara lowered herself carefully into the other chair. "So the company's right? You've no legal claim?" "Been working this land 15 years. Elias repeated stubbornly. "Built every stick of this cabin myself, cleared the meadow, dug the root cellar." "And who saw you do all that?" Clara asked sharply. "Who could testify you've worked this land all that time?" Elias blinked. "Trappers who passed through. Indian agent from the reservation, he stopped here regular. Old Doc Wilson, before he moved east." His voice grew stronger as he remembered. "Trading post down in the valley. They got my name in their books going back years." "Good." Clara nodded, her mind already working. "That's what we need. Witnesses. Proof you've improved this land, lived here continuous." Another pain gripped her, and she breathed through it carefully. "We're not giving up this home without a fight, Mr. Hart. Not to some mining company with forged papers." Elias stared at her, something like hope kindling in his eyes. You made me a bargain," Clara reminded him, her voice firm despite her discomfort. "Can't very well hold up my end if we lose the land, can I?" She pushed herself to her feet. "Now, help me get these rabbits cleaned before supper. We've got planning to do." The first rays of sunlight crept through the cabin windows, painting golden squares on the rough-hewn floor. Clara sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, while Elias paced near the hearth. The children still slept soundly, their soft breathing a gentle counterpoint to the morning birds outside. "There's folks who'd speak for me," Elias said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Family I helped some years back. Comanche people, good folks." He paused, running a hand through his wild beard. "They're at the reservation now, moved there last spring." Clara leaned forward, ignoring the persistent ache in her lower back. "Tell me about them." "Their youngest got fever bad. I knew some herbs, things my Sarah taught me." Elias's eyes grew distant with memory. "Stayed with them 3 days until the boy's fever broke. They offered me a horse in payment, but I wouldn't take it." "We need to find them," Clara said firmly. "Their word could help prove how long you've been here, how you've helped people." She set down her cup with a decisive clink. "But first, we need someone who knows their way around the reservation." Elias nodded slowly. "Reverend Briggs might help. He's camped down by Willow Creek. Been there near a week now." He glanced at Clara's swollen belly. "I can ride out, be back by sundown." "No." Clara pushed herself to her feet. "I'm coming with you. The children too." When Elias opened his mouth to protest, she raised a hand. "We're in this together now, Mr. Hart. Besides, the Reverend knows me from the mining camp. He'll understand what's at stake." Elias looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Clara's stance made him think better of it. Wagon'll be rough riding, he warned instead. I've endured worse, Clara replied, already moving to wake the children. Tommy, Ellie, time to rise. We're going on an adventure. The morning passed in a flurry of preparation. Clara packed bread and dried meat, while Elias hitched their ancient mare to the wagon. Tommy helped load blankets, proud to be useful, while Ellie clutched her worn rag doll close. The wagon creaked and swayed as they made their way down the mountain trail. Clara sat beside Elias on the driver's bench. The children nestled safely among the blankets behind them. Every jolt sent waves of discomfort through her body, but she kept her face composed, focusing on the rhythm of the horse's hooves. They found Reverend Joseph Briggs's camp just past noon. His tent stood in a small clearing, a thin stream of smoke rising from his cooking fire. The Reverend himself sat on a fallen log, reading from a well-worn Bible. He looked up at their approach, his dark face breaking into a warm smile. Well now, he called out, marking his place with a leather string. If it isn't Sister Clara. He stood, revealing his impressive height, and Clara noticed Elias straighten slightly beside her. And you must be Hart. Heard tell of you up in these parts. Reverend. Elias nodded stiffly. Clara didn't waste time with pleasantries. We need your help, Reverend Briggs. The mining company's trying to take Mr. Hart's land with forged papers. They're claiming the spring, and we've got less than a week to prove his claim. Briggs's expression grew serious. Come down from the wagon, sister. Rest yourself proper while we talk. He helped Clara down carefully, then lifted Ellie with practiced ease. Got some coffee brewing, and I reckon these young ones might like a biscuit. Once they were settled around the fire, Clara and Elias took turns explaining their situation. Briggs listened intently, his shrewd eyes taking in every detail. When they mentioned the Comanche family, he nodded slowly. I know the family you speak of, he said. Good people. I visit the reservation twice a month, tend to spiritual needs there. He studied them both for a long moment. I can guide you there tomorrow, but it's a full day's journey, there and back. You sure you're up for that, Sister Clara? I have to be, Clara replied simply. This isn't just about the land anymore, it's about what's right. Briggs smiled, approval warming his features. Then we'll leave at first light. You'll stay here tonight. Got plenty of room in my tent, and I'll sleep fine under the stars. He turned to Elias. Your testimony about helping their boy will carry weight. Shows you've been a good neighbor, not just a squatter. Elias shifted uncomfortably. Never thought I'd need proving. Land was wild when I came. Built everything with my own hands. Sometimes that ain't enough, Briggs said gently. But don't worry. Lord provides helpers when they're needed most. He looked meaningfully at Clara, then began making arrangements for their overnight stay. As the afternoon waned, Clara watched Tommy helping the Reverend gather firewood while Ellie dozed in her lap. Beside her, Elias sat lost in thought, his usual scowl softened by something that might have been hope. They had taken the first step toward fighting back, and though the path ahead was uncertain, they wouldn't walk it alone. The morning mist clung to the valley as they set out, their wagon creaking under the weight of supplies. Reverend Briggs led the way on his sturdy brown mare, while Elias handled the reins of their own wagon with careful precision. Every bump and dip in the rutted trail sent jolts through Clara's body, each one harder to hide than the last. Tommy sat between his mother and Elias, eyes wide with wonder at the changing landscape. Look, Ma, deer tracks, he called out, pointing to marks in the muddy path. Elias nodded approvingly. Good eye, boy. Fresh ones too, probably passed through just before dawn. He glanced down at Tommy's eager face. Want to learn how to tell how old they are? The wagon lurched to a stop as Elias climbed down, helping Tommy follow. Clara watched as the mountain man knelt beside the tracks, his massive frame somehow gentler as he showed her son how to read the morning story written in mud and crushed grass. See here, Elias pointed. Edges still sharp. Water hasn't filled them yet. Means they're new. Tommy nodded seriously. soaking in every word. Little Ellie squirmed on the wagon seat. "I want to see too," she declared, reaching toward Elias with trusting arms. Without hesitation, he lifted her onto his broad shoulders, a delighted giggle echoing through the trees. Clara pressed a hand to her belly, breathing through another contraction. They were coming more frequently now, but she kept her face calm. They couldn't afford delays, not with time running so short. Reverend Briggs dropped back beside their wagon. "Creek's about 4 hours ahead," he said quietly. "Good place to make camp for the night." His dark eyes studied Clara's face. Might be wise to rest there a spell. The day wore on, sun climbing high as they followed the winding trail. Elias continued pointing out signs of wildlife to the children. A rabbit's burrow here, turkey scratches there. Tommy hung on every word, while Ellie dozed contentedly against Elias's chest, her small hands tangled in his beard. By late afternoon, Clara's knuckles were white on the wagon's wooden seat. Each jolt sent waves of pain through her body, but she focused on the sight before her, Elias with her children, his gruff manner melting away like spring snow. It gave her strength to endure. They made camp as the sun began to set, the creek's gentle burble a soothing backdrop. Briggs tended to the horses while Elias helped Clara down from the wagon, his hands steady and sure. If he noticed how she leaned into his support more than usual, he didn't mention it. Tommy helped gather kindling, while Ellie supervised from her perch on a fallen log. Soon, a cheerful fire crackled in the growing darkness. Reverend Briggs produced a pot of beans and some hardtack from his saddlebags, sharing out the simple meal with grateful hands. "Shall we thank the Lord for his provision?" Briggs asked softly. They bowed their heads as his deep voice rolled out across the campsite. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for safe passage, and for bringing together those who need each other. Guide us in our journey ahead, and grant us your wisdom and protection. Amen." After the children were tucked into blankets in the wagon bed, Clara eased herself down beside the fire. Another contraction gripped her, stronger than before, and she couldn't quite suppress a small gasp. Briggs moved closer, keeping his voice low. "How long have they been coming, sister?" "Since morning," Clara admitted. "Getting stronger now. I'm afraid—" She glanced at her sleeping children, afraid of what might happen if the baby comes out here on the trail. "The Lord doesn't give us more than we can handle," Briggs reassured her, though concern lined his weathered face. "And you're not alone anymore." Unknown to them, Elias stood in the shadows beyond the firelight, his face troubled as he listened. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, memories of another woman, another birth, threatening to overwhelm him. The night passed slowly for Clara, each contraction marking time like a painful clock. When dawn finally broke, she knew with certainty that her time was near. They packed up camp quickly, Elias hovering close as she climbed onto the wagon seat. "Not far now," Briggs announced as they set out. "Reservations just beyond that rise." Clara nodded, unable to speak as another wave of pain washed over her. The children, sensing something was wrong, stayed unusually quiet in the back of the wagon. Even little Ellie didn't complain when the wheels hit particularly rough patches. As they crested the final hill, the reservation's wooden gates came into view below. Clara clutched the seat's edge, her breath coming in short gasps. "Mr. Hart," she managed between clenched teeth, "I believe this baby's decided not to wait any longer." The wagon jolted to a stop beneath a massive cottonwood, its branches offering blessed shade from the midday sun. Clara's knuckles were white against the wooden seat as another contraction seized her. "Here," she gasped. "The baby's coming now." Reverend Briggs sprang into action, directing Elias to help Clara down while he spread clean blankets in the shelter of the tree. Tommy and Ellie watched with wide eyes from the wagon until Briggs gently steered them to sit beneath a nearby oak, teaching them a simple hymn to keep them occupied. Elias's hands trembled as he supported Clara's weight. His face had gone pale beneath his wild beard, and sweat beaded on his forehead that had nothing to do with the warm spring day. I don't know what to do, he admitted, voice rough with fear. Clara grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You'll do exactly as I say, she told him firmly, though her words ended in a groan as another contraction built. I've helped birth dozens of babies in the mining camps. Just follow my instructions. Briggs brought water from the creek and clean rags from Clara's trunk, setting them within easy reach. I'll keep watch and mind the children, he said, understanding this moment wasn't meant for too many eyes. Clara positioned herself against the tree's broad trunk, her breathing heavy but controlled. Elias, she commanded, kneel here. You'll need to catch the baby. The mountain man's face went even paler, but he moved where directed, his massive hands gentle as they supported Clara's back. The minutes stretched like hours as Clara labored, her quiet determination a stark contrast to Elias's barely contained panic. Talk to me, Clara demanded between contractions. Anything. Tell me about your home before the cabin. I dot. Elias started, then seemed to understand she needed the distraction. Had a farm in Ohio, good land, grew corn tall as a man's shoulder. His voice steadied as he spoke, though his hands still shook. Had apple trees too, just starting to bear fruit when… He trailed off, but Clara seized his arm again. The baby's coming now, she said through clenched teeth. Be ready. What followed was a blur of action and instruction, Clara's calm directions guiding Elias's trembling hands. Then, suddenly, a new sound filled the air, the lusty cry of a healthy baby boy. Well done, Clara breathed, exhausted but triumphant. Clean him off with those rags there, wrap him warm. Alicia stared down at the tiny life in his massive hands, wonder replacing fear on his weathered face. The baby's cries softened as Elias carefully cleaned and swaddled him, movements becoming more confident with each passing moment. Samuel, Clara said softly, watching them. Samuel Elias Hart. Elias's head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. You're naming him. After the man who helped bring him into this world, Clara finished. If you'll have us properly, that is. All of us. Tears tracked down through Elias's beard as he carefully passed Samuel back to Clara. Tommy and Ellie crept closer, Briggs following with a tender smile as they met their new brother. They rested through the heat of the day, giving Clara time to recover her strength. As evening approached, they made the final push to the reservation, arriving just as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. At the gates, an elderly native woman stood waiting, her silver hair bound in traditional braids, her face deeply lined but kind. Recognition flickered in her eyes as she caught sight of Elias. Grizzly Heart, she said, her voice warm with memory. Many seasons have passed since you pulled my grandson from the flash flood. Nokomi, Elias replied, inclining his head respectfully. I had hoped you would remember. The woman's dark eyes took in the whole group. Clara cradling newborn Samuel, Tommy and Ellie half hidden behind Elias's legs, Reverend Briggs standing respectfully to one side. I see you have finally found your new family, Nokomi said, smiling. The one the spirits promised would heal your heart. She stepped forward, reaching up to place a weathered hand against Elias's cheek. Welcome home, all of you. Come, we have much to discuss, and your woman needs rest. As they followed Nokomi through the gates, Elias caught Clara's eye. Something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, and perhaps something deeper beginning to take root. Samuel slept peacefully in his mother's arms, his tiny hand curled around one of Elias's fingers, binding them together as surely as any contract or deed. The reservation's evening fires cast a warm glow as Nokomi led them toward her lodge, their shadows merging into one as they walked the dusty path together. Dawn broke over the reservation with gentle fingers of light, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Inside Nokomi's lodge, the morning fire crackled softly as Clara sat cross-legged on woven blankets, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms. Tommy and Ellie dozed nearby, curled up like kittens in the warmth. Elias sat beside Clara, his massive frame somehow less imposing in the intimate space of the lodge. His fingers absently traced patterns in the dirt floor as Clara explained their situation to Nokomi, who listened with the patience of ancient stones. The mining company claims the land was never properly registered, Clara explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. They presented papers, but something about them felt wrong. The seal looked different from other documents I've seen. Nokomi's weathered hands wrapped around a clay cup of steaming tea. "The spring you speak of," she said, her English clear and measured, "has been known to my people for many generations. When Elias first settled there, he did something rare among white settlers. He asked permission." Elias shifted uncomfortably at the praise, but Nokomi continued. "He shared the water freely with any who passed, including our hunting parties. He helped my grandson when others would have turned away. This is the truth I will speak before any council." "But will it be enough?" Clara asked, adjusting Samuel as he stirred. "The mining company has money. Influence?" "Money speaks loudly," Nokomi agreed. "But it is not the only voice that matters. There are others in your town who remember Elias's help over the years. The rancher whose cattle he helped find in the winter storm. The widow whose roof he repaired without asking payment. These voices, together with ours, will be harder to ignore." Reverend Briggs, who had been quietly listening from near the lodge entrance, spoke up. "Nokomi's right. The mining company's influence is strong, but they're not well liked. People remember how they've pushed out other families, dried up streams with their operations." He straightened his collar thoughtfully. "I can ride ahead, speak to Judge Wilson and Martha at the general store. They've never trusted Lester Cray's smooth talk." Clara looked at Elias, who had remained characteristically quiet throughout the discussion. "What do you think?" Elias cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to contain. "Never thought to ask for help before. Always figured my word and work should be enough." He met Clara's eyes. "But now I've got more than just myself to think about." Nokomi smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "At last you understand. No one stands alone on this earth. The Great Spirit gives us community for a reason." She turned to Clara. "You have brought him this wisdom, I think." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "He's teaching me things too," she admitted softly. "About strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard." Elias's hand found hers in the space between them, rough calluses gentle against her skin. The touch was brief, but speaking volumes about their growing trust. Nokomi rose with fluid grace despite her years. "I will gather what we need for your journey home. The children should eat before you travel." She paused at the lodge entrance. "And I will prepare a written statement about the spring's history. Words on paper carry weight with your courts, yes?" Briggs nodded appreciatively. "That they do, ma'am. That they do." While Nokomi's family helped prepare supplies for their return journey, Briggs outlined his plan. "I'll take the South Trail into town. Can probably reach Judge Wilson by nightfall. He's always been fair-minded, especially when it comes to family matters." He glanced meaningfully at Clara and the children. "We'll aim to have the council meeting called within 3 days." Clara began gathering their belongings, expertly balancing Samuel in one arm while directing Tommy and Ellie to roll up their blankets. Elias moved to help, his big hands surprisingly deft with the baby's things. Outside, as they loaded the wagon, Nokomi approached with a small bundle wrapped in clean cloth. "Herbs," she explained, pressing it into Clara's hands. "For the baby and for your milk. You will need your strength for what's ahead." Clara blinked back unexpected tears at the kindness. "Thank you for everything." Nokomi clasped Clara's free hand between both of hers. "You are building something precious here," she said softly. "A bridge between hearts long wounded. This is holy work, worth fighting for." The morning sun had climbed higher as they made their final preparations. Briggs mounted his horse, tipping his hat to them all. "I'll have word sent once the council meeting is arranged. Until then, keep gathering those testimonies. Every voice will count." They watched him ride south before turning their own wagon toward home. Elias helped Clara and the children settle in the back, making sure they were comfortable for the journey. As they passed through the reservation gates, Nakomi raised her hand in blessing. Clara looked back, watching the elder woman's figure grow smaller in the distance. The bundle of herbs sat warm in her lap, a tangible reminder of the alliance they'd forged. Samuel slept against her chest, his steady breathing a counterpoint to the wagon's gentle sway. Beside her, Tommy and Ellie pointed excitedly at a hawk circling overhead, while Elias guided the horses with sure hands. They were not alone in their fight anymore. That knowledge felt like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, warm, sustaining, and full of promise. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as they made their way back to the cabin, the afternoon sun warming their shoulders. Clara held Samuel close, while Tommy and Ellie dozed against burlap sacks filled with supplies from the reservation. Elias handled the reins with careful attention, choosing the smoothest path possible for his precious cargo. When they finally reached the cabin, the sight of its weathered logs and smoke-blackened chimney felt different somehow. No longer just a shelter of desperation, but the beginning of something permanent, something worth fighting for. "Home, sweet home," Clara murmured, more to herself than anyone else. But Elias heard her, and his shoulders straightened just a bit, as if the word home had given him new strength. After helping Clara and the children down from the wagon, Elias surveyed the yard with fresh eyes. Broken barrel staves, rusty tools, and years of accumulated debris cluttered the space. It wouldn't do for the council members who might come to inspect the property. "We ought to clear this," he said gruffly. Clara nodded, adjusting Samuel in her arms. "Show them we take pride in our place." She emphasized the word "our" slightly, and Elias's weather-worn face softened for a moment. They settled into work as the day progressed. Clara set up her sewing station by the window where the light was best. She'd traded some of their eggs for feed sacks at the reservation, and now she carefully picked apart the seams, planning how to make the most of the sturdy fabric. "Tommy," she called, "come here and let me measure you proper." The boy bounded over, standing straight and proud as Clara held up the fabric. "Are these for the meeting, Ma?" "That's right. We're going to look our Sunday best when we face that council." She smiled at his eager expression. "Now hold still while I mark these shoulders." Outside, Elias had begun the cleanup in earnest. Years of solitude had left him careless about appearances, but now he saw each broken tool and rotting board through Clara's practical eyes. He sorted through the debris, salvaging what could be useful and organizing the rest for disposal. "Can I help, Mr. Hart?" Tommy asked, having escaped his measuring session. The boy stood hopefully nearby, small hands ready for work. Elias considered the child thoughtfully. "Reckon you're big enough to learn about kindling." He picked up his axe, then selected a smaller hatchet that would fit Tommy's grip. "Come here, boy. Let me show you something important." Clara watched through the window as Elias knelt beside Tommy, his huge hands gentle as they positioned the boy's fingers on the hatchet handle. "Keep your thumb tucked in like so," she heard him say. "That's how you stay safe." The afternoon light slanted golden across the yard as father and son worked together. Elias demonstrated the proper technique for splitting small logs, his movements deliberate and careful. Tommy's face screwed up in concentration as he mimicked each action, determined to prove himself worthy of this grown-up task. Inside, Clara had finished cutting patterns from the feed sacks and now worked the treadle of her borrowed sewing machine with practiced ease. Ellie sat at her feet, sorting buttons from Clara's mending kit with serious attention. Samuel slept peacefully in his makeshift cradle, a sturdy wooden box that Elias had lined with soft blankets. The steady rhythm of their work was interrupted by hoofbeats approaching. A young boy from town, who helped Reverend Briggs with messages, rode up to their gate. He handed Clara a telegram, then quickly turned his pony homeward. Clara read the message aloud, her voice carrying to where Elias and Tommy worked. Council meeting set for Wednesday. Stop 3 days' time. Stop gather. Witnesses, stop Reverend Briggs. Elias drove his axe into a stump and walked over, wiping his brow. 3 days ain't much time. It's enough, Clara said firmly. We've got truth on our side, and good people willing to speak it. She looked down at the half-finished dress in her lap, then at the cleared space in the yard. We'll be ready. Tommy proudly showed Clara the neat pile of kindling he'd split. Look, Ma, Mr. Hart showed me how to do it proper, so we'll always have dry wood for your cooking fire. Clara's eyes met Elias's over their son's head. The simple phrase, always have, hung in the air between them, full of meaning. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle anymore. It was about building a foundation for their shared future, as solid as the kindling Tommy had split, as carefully crafted as the clothes Clara was sewing. As evening approached, they gathered for a simple supper of cornbread and beans. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow, despite the spring chill. Tommy chattered about his wood-cutting lessons while Ellie arranged her saved buttons in careful patterns on the table. Samuel woke for his feeding, his small sounds joining the family chorus. Elias sat at the head of the table, quieter than the others, but present in a way he hadn't been before. His eyes took in each face, lingering on Clara's as she hummed softly to Samuel. The mining company might have money and influence, but sitting there in the gathering dusk, Elias realized they had something stronger, a family bound together by choice, respect, and growing love. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountain peaks when Clara adjusted Samuel's blanket one final time. She'd dressed him in a clean white gown she'd sewn from the softest feed sack, embroidered with tiny blue stars around the collar. Tommy and Ellie stood nearby in their new clothes, backs straight and faces freshly scrubbed. Elias emerged from the cabin wearing his one good shirt, his wild beard trimmed and hair combed back. He'd polished his boots until they gleamed, though his shoulders remained tense under the unfamiliar constraints of formal wear. Reverend Briggs arrived first, his wagon rattling up the path. Shortly after, Nokomi appeared on her painted mare, her silver hair braided formally, and wearing her finest trade blanket. Her presence carried a dignity that made Clara stand taller. "The children can ride with me," Briggs offered, helping Tommy and Ellie climb aboard his wagon. Clara kept Samuel close, settling into Elias's wagon with careful movements. The small convoy set out for town, their wheels raising dust in the cool morning air. As they approached the town's main street, Clara felt the weight of every stare. Townspeople paused in their morning routines, whispering behind raised hands. Many hadn't seen Elias in years, and his appearance with a woman, children, and a native elder drew immediate attention. "Look at old Grizzly Heart," someone muttered. "Finally crawled out of his cave." Clara lifted her chin, cradling Samuel closer. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the tension around him. Elias's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward, guiding the wagon toward the council hall. The building stood 2 stories tall, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of boots. Lester Cray and his men lounged near the entrance, their casual poses betraying their satisfaction. Cray's smile widened as he watched Clara carefully descend from the wagon, Samuel in her arms. "Quite the circus you've brought to town, Hart," Cray called out. His words carried just enough venom to sting while maintaining a veneer of civility. Inside the hall, morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of wooden benches filled with curious townsfolk. The council members sat at a raised table, their expressions carefully neutral as Clara's group filed in. Cray's men spread their documentation across a side table with flourish, the deed's official-looking seal catching the light. Clara noticed how they positioned the papers to hide certain portions while emphasizing others. When the council chairman called the meeting to order, Cray stepped forward first, his voice smooth as creek stones. "Gentlemen, this is a simple matter of legal documentation. The mining company holds clear title to this land, including the spring." He gestured to the papers with practiced confidence. Clara handed Samuel to Elias and stepped forward, her skirts rustling in the sudden quiet. "With respect, council members, I'd like to examine that deed." Her voice carried clearly through the hall, stronger than she felt. Cray's smile faltered slightly as Clara approached the documents. She'd spent hours studying land records with Reverend Briggs, learning what to look for. Now, with steady hands, she pointed out discrepancies that couldn't be ignored. "The seal's impression is irregular here," she noted, indicating the warped edges. "And the paper itself." She held the document up to the light, revealing a watermark that hadn't existed when the deed was supposedly signed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cray shifted his weight, shooting a warning glance at his men. Nakomi rose next, her presence commanding immediate attention. "I have lived in these mountains for 63 summers," she began, her English clear and measured. "My people used this spring in peace with Elias Hart's blessing. He has honored our ways and protected the water for all who need it." Her testimony carried the weight of generations. Reverend Briggs stepped forward, his military bearing evident as he addressed the council. "As a former Buffalo soldier who served this territory, I understand the importance of lawful recognition. Elias Hart has worked this land for 15 years, improving it, protecting it. His claim predates any mining company interest." Cray's face darkened. "These emotional appeals don't override legal ownership," he snapped, his composure cracking. "A recluse, a widow, and an Indian can't—" "That's enough, Cray." The new voice belonged to Jacob Wheeler, a rancher whose spread bordered 3 counties. He stood from the audience, his weathered face stern. "I've watered my cattle at Hart Spring every season for 12 years. He's never turned away an honest need. That mining company's been trying to grab every water source from here to the territory line." Wheeler's words carried weight. Other ranchers nodded in agreement, and several townspeople began sharing their own stories of Elias's quiet assistance over the years. Clara watched as the council members leaned together, speaking in low voices. The chairman's gavel cracked against wood, bringing the hall to silence. All eyes turned to the council table, where the fate of their home hung in the balance. The council chairman's verdict rang clear through the hall. Elias Hart's claim would stand. The spring and surrounding land belonged to him, as it had for 15 years. The mining company's forged deed was declared null and void. Lester Cray's face twisted with rage. He snatched his hat from the table, storming toward the door. The heavy slam echoed through the council hall, making little Samuel start crying. Clara bounced him gently, her heart too full of joy to care about Cray's tantrum. Neighbors crowded around them, offering congratulations. Even folks who'd never spoken to Elias before clapped him on the back. The big mountain man looked overwhelmed by the attention, but a hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth beneath his wild beard. "Time to head home," Clara said softly, touching his arm. "The children need their supper." The ride back to the cabin was lighter than the morning's journey had been. Tommy and Ellie rode in Reverend Briggs's wagon again, pestering him with questions about his Buffalo soldier days. The Reverend's deep laugh carried on the evening breeze. At the cabin, Clara set to work preparing a celebration supper. She'd traded some of her mending work for a chicken last week, saving it for either victory or comfort. Tonight, it would be victory. The savory smell of chicken and dumplings filled the small cabin. "Pass the biscuits, please," Tommy said, remembering his manners. His face was already smudged with gravy. "More dumplings!" Ellie demanded, making everyone laugh. Even Samuel seemed to share in the joy, cooing from his cradle by the hearth. Clara watched Elias watching the baby, saw the softness in his eyes that was becoming more frequent these days. After the dishes were cleared and the children tucked into their bed in the corner, Clara pulled out her sewing basket. But instead of thread and needles, she removed a straight razor and soap cup. "Sit," she told Elias, pointing to a chair she'd pulled into the lamplight. He eyed the razor warily. "What's that for?" "Time we saw the man under all that wilderness," Clara said. "I've trimmed plenty of beards in my day. Trust me." Something flickered in his eyes at the question. Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair. Clara draped a clean cloth around his shoulders and worked up a lather with the soap. "Hold still now," she murmured, bringing the razor to his cheek. With careful strokes, she began revealing the face that had been hidden for so long. The lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the small scar near his jaw, the strong lines of his face. "There you are," Clara said softly when she finished. She wiped away the last traces of soap with a damp cloth. Her fingers lingered for a moment on his newly smooth cheek. Elias reached up, touching his face as if meeting a stranger. "Feels strange," he admitted, "but good strange, I reckon." "I like seeing you," Clara said simply. "The real you." The moment stretched between them, warm and full of possibility. Then Samuel whimpered in his cradle, and Clara turned away to tend to him. Elias stoked the fire for the night, his movements more relaxed than she'd ever seen them. The peace lasted until well past midnight. Clara woke to the acrid smell of smoke. At first she thought the fire had escaped the hearth, but the burning scent was too strong, too close. "Elias!" she called out, already reaching for Samuel. "Fire!" Elias burst through the door, his face stark in the orange glow coming through the windows. "Get the children out! Now!" Clara scooped up Samuel while Elias shook Tommy and Ellie awake. They stumbled outside into the cold night air. Flames were already climbing the cabin's outer walls, feeding on oil-soaked wood. "Craze men," Elias growled, his face terrible in the firelight. "Had to have been." Clara clutched Samuel to her chest, her other hand holding Ellie close while Tommy pressed against her skirts. The heat of the fire pushed them further back, forcing them to watch as their home burned. Elias made a move towards the cabin, but Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't! The roof's about to go!" As if her words had summoned it, the roof collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. Sparks shot skyward like angry fireflies. The flames reflected in Elias's eyes, and Clara saw the same haunted look she'd glimpsed when he'd first opened his door to them. "Not again," he whispered, his voice raw. "I can't lose another family. I can't." Clara shifted Samuel to one arm so she could take Elias's hand. "Look at me," she commanded. When he did, she squeezed his fingers hard. "We're right here. We're alive. And we're not going anywhere." Tommy pressed against Elias's leg, and Ellie reached up for him. Almost automatically, he lifted the little girl into his arms. Samuel's cry pierced the night, a reminder that life went on. They stood together, watching their home burn as the first grey light of dawn began to creep over the mountains. Dawn revealed the true extent of the destruction. Smoke still curled from the blackened timbers, and the acrid smell of burned wood hung heavy in the morning air. Clara stood with Samuel bundled close, watching Elias wade through the ruins. His shoulders sagged with each step, as if carrying an invisible burden. "Be careful of hot spots," she called out, keeping Tommy and Ellie back from the debris. The children clung to her skirts, their eyes wide at the sight of their destroyed home. Elias emerged from the wreckage holding a scorched wooden box. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a few photographs and papers that had survived. "This is all that's left," he said, his voice hollow. "Just like before. Everything burns. Everyone leaves." Clara handed Samuel to Tommy, who held his baby brother with practiced care. She marched over to Elias, her boots crunching on charred wood. "Look at me, Elias Hart," she demanded, standing straight despite her exhaustion. "We're still here. Your family is still here. You should go," he whispered, not meeting her eyes. "I'm cursed. Everything I touch turns to ash." Clara grabbed his hand, forcing him to face her. "A home's not the wood. It's who rebuilds it," she said firmly. "And we will rebuild, together." "How can you be so sure?" His voice cracked with raw pain. "Because I choose to be," she answered. "And because you're worth fighting for. This family is worth fighting for." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Reverend Briggs rode up, his horse lathered from hard riding. He dismounted quickly, his face bright with news despite the destruction before him. "The council's decision is official," he announced, pulling a document from his saddlebag. "The land and spring are yours, Elias. Legally binding, with witnesses' signatures. Even Cray can't dispute it now." Elias took the paper with shaking hands. "Fat lot of good it does us without a roof," he muttered. "Papa Elias," little Ellie called out, using the name she'd given him just days ago. She toddled over, arms raised to be picked up. "Can we build a bigger house? With a special room for Samuel?" Something shifted in Elias's expression as he lifted her up. Clara watched the change sweep across his face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He looked at each of them. Tommy standing tall while holding the baby, Clara with her unwavering gaze, and Ellie in his arms. "Reckon we can," he said finally, his voice growing stronger. "Reckon we should." Clara smiled, seeing hope replace despair in his eyes. They had lost their shelter, but they had found something far more precious, the will to build again together. The news of the burning traveled faster than wind-blown sparks. By midday, hoofbeats echoed across the valley as riders approached the scorched cabin site. Nakomi led the way, her weathered face set with determination, followed by 6 strong men from her tribe. Their wagon creaked under the weight of fresh-cut pine logs. "The winter stores were meant to share," Nakomi declared, dismounting with fluid grace despite her years. "Now they will become your new beginning." Before Clara could respond, more wagons appeared on the horizon. Reverend Briggs sat tall in the lead wagon, surrounded by familiar faces from town. The baker, the blacksmith, 3 ranchers who'd stood with them at the council meeting. These were men who'd watched Elias from afar over the years, respecting his quiet way even if they'd never spoken. "Thought you might need some extra hands," Briggs called out, his smile bright against his dark skin. Tools clinked in the wagon bed, saws, hammers, and enough nails to raise a fortress. Elias stood frozen, his eyes wide at the sight of so many people on his land. Clara squeezed his arm gently. "See?" she whispered. "We're not alone." The work began without ceremony. Men cleared the burned timber while others marked out a foundation larger than the original cabin. Elias found his voice directing the work, sharing his knowledge of the land's slopes and the way winter winds blew through the valley. "Tommy," he called, beckoning to the boy who hadn't left his side. "Watch close now. These nails need to go in straight and true." He guided Tommy's small hands, showing him how to tap the nail just so before driving it home. The boy's face glowed with pride at each successful strike. Little Ellie insisted on helping too. Elias lifted her up to place smooth stones in the cornerstone mix, explaining how they'd hold the cabin's weight. "Strong foundation makes a strong home," he told her, and she nodded with serious understanding. The days blurred together in a symphony of sawing, hammering, and shared meals around the worksite fire. Clara moved among the workers with Samuel in a sling, offering water and thanks. Each evening, the progress was measured not just in walls raised and beams set, but in the way Elias's shoulders straightened, his voice grew sure, his smile came easier. The new cabin took shape: 2 proper bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a covered porch where Clara imagined summer evenings watching the children play. But more than lumber and nails, it was built of something stronger, the threads of community binding them all together, weaving Elias back into the fabric of human connection he'd long ago abandoned. As the last nail was driven and the final board secured, the completed cabin stood proud against the mountain backdrop. Neighbors and friends gathered to celebrate, arranging long wooden tables beneath the vast Colorado sky. The aroma of fresh-baked bread, roasted venison, and Clara's apple pies drifted on the autumn breeze. Nakomi's people brought wild rice and dried berries, while town wives carried covered dishes filled with hearty stews and corn bread. Children darted between the tables, their laughter echoing across the valley. Tommy and Ellie helped Clara lay out tin plates and cups, beaming with pride at their new home. Reverend Briggs stood at the head of the gathered crowd, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "Bow your heads with me, friends," he said, raising his weathered hands. "Lord, we thank you for bringing this family together, for showing us how strength grows when we join hands in times of trouble. Bless this home and those who dwell within it. Let it stand as a testament to what can be built when hearts open and old wounds heal. Amen." "Amen," the crowd echoed, and plates began to pass. Elias cleared his throat, standing awkwardly before the gathered friends and neighbors, his clean-shaven face flushed as he searched for words. "I lived alone up here for many years," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Thought that's all I deserved, after everything. Then Clara showed up with those young ones, offering me a chance I didn't know I needed." He turned to face her, where she sat with baby Samuel in her arms, her second pregnancy just beginning to show. "You've given me more than I ever dared ask for. A family, a reason to build something lasting. Thank you." Clara's eyes glistened as scattered applause turned to hearty cheering. Neighbors clapped Elias on the back, while the women dabbed at tears. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the children slept soundly in their new rooms, Clara and Elias sat together by the hearth. The fresh-laid stones still held the day's warmth, and flames danced in the firebox they'd built together. "It's hard to believe," Clara said softly, her hand resting on her growing belly. "How much has changed since that rainy night I knocked on your door." Elias reached over, his large hand covering hers. "You built more than just a home here, Clara. You built a life worth living." The firelight flickered across the new walls, casting warm shadows in the quiet room. Outside, crickets sang their evening song, a peaceful melody for a family finally whole. The first snowfall of winter drifted down from pearl-gray skies, coating the mountain in pristine white. Inside the newly built cabin, lamplight cast a gentle glow across worn floorboards as Clara rocked baby Samuel. The infant's tiny fingers curled around the edge of his blanket, while his steady breathing mingled with the crackle of the hearth fire. Tommy and Ellie sprawled on their bellies near the flames, pushing wooden horses across the floor in an imaginary race. Their quiet giggles and whispered commentary filled the room with the simple joy of childhood at play. Ellie's dark curls caught the firelight as she moved her horse ahead of her brother's, prompting a good-natured protest from Tommy. The door creaked open, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and the broad figure of Elias Hart. He stamped his boots on the threshold, shaking powder from his coat like a great bear rousing from slumber. The children looked up at the sound, their faces brightening. "Pa!" Tommy called out, scrambling to his feet. "Did you see how deep the snow's getting?" Elias hung his coat by the door, a small smile playing beneath his trimmed beard. "Reckon it'll be knee-deep by morning," he said, his voice warm with contentment. The sound of his family, their laughter, their movement, their very presence, filled spaces in his heart he'd thought forever empty. He crossed the room to where Clara sat in her rocking chair, the lamplight catching the copper highlights in her hair. Settling beside her on the bench, he reached out to rest his weathered hand on the gentle swell of her belly. Their fourth child, due when spring's first flowers would paint the mountainside. Clara's free hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "Do you remember that night?" she asked softly, her eyes holding his. "When you offered to raise my children in exchange for more?" Elias's throat tightened at the memory, at how close he'd come to turning them away, at how desperate and alone they'd all been. "Never knew then," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Just how much more I'd be given. None of us did," Clara whispered. Her eyes shone with unshed tears as she watched Tommy help Ellie arrange their toy horses in a neat row. Elias lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "I asked for children," he murmured, his words meant for her alone. "The Lord gave me a home." Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake adding to the pristine blanket that covered their land. The rebuilt cabin stood strong against the weather, its windows glowing with warmth and life, a beacon of hope on the mountainside. Within its walls, a family born of necessity had blossomed into one bound by the deepest love, their shared trials transformed into the foundation of lasting joy. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.